Hello, this is Desiree Delahant, and this is my EDL 853 Module 3 video. Before I do begin, I want to apologize for my professional dress. This week is our Spirit Week, so this actually is professional dress for our school district this week. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. My resources for this video, I was really lucky to be put into such a great school. I interviewed 3 ladies that work in my building. The first one is Janet Smith, and she is our principal, our head principal at Charles Stone's Intermediate Center. The second person I interviewed was Sarah Drabinski, and she is our resource math teacher, and she teaches both 5th and 6th grade resource math. She's amazing. She is very involved, and she has started robotics in our school, and she has also started working with robotics in the high school. So she's really just a great teacher. The last person I interviewed was Nikki Miller, and she is a paraprofessional in our SMH-TMH room, and that's our severely mentally handicapped and treatable mentally handicapped room. The first question that I talked about with all 3 of these ladies was what their child find procedures were. I did get different answers from our para than I did from the special ed teacher as well as the principal. Ms. Smith said that teacher concerns start the process. And Miss Miller here over at the end, she really said that she's good at picking up on delays and notifying the necessary people. So they do take part in this. They are just notifying somebody so that we can start that process. The process from Miss Smith, we use the child find process, and we begin by looking at data and we refer them to our SAT team. From there we create an ILP, and then depending on what their case is, we start providing modifications and accommodations, and we're going to use that data and we're going to look at them anywhere between 6 months and 2 years to get them qualified for special education. Mrs. Drabinski said basically the same thing. We're going to use SAT. Then we need to determine whether it's a learning issue or a language issue. We do have a high population of ESL students in our district, so we have to make sure that it's not someone who's a newcomer and that it actually is an educational disability and not because they're just learning the language. We also have to make sure that they have been in school for long term without big gaps in their education, and by big gaps we mean they have had continuous education for 2 years. And I'm going to have to move my box around here. The most challenging part of working with special education students was the next question that I asked them. Ms. Smith said that it's really challenging when we can't get help fast enough for those students. Scheduling and making sure they're in the correct place is also very challenging. And then really carefully following those rules and determining if we're dealing with a learning disability and a language barrier. That, again, we have to make sure that it is not language, it is actually learning and academic. Ms. Drabinski said basically the same thing. She has a hard time, though, teaching a whole class in a way that they all can get it, and that is challenging for her. She feels that a lot of times she's going to have to say the same thing 5 times, and they still aren't getting it. So basically, just making sure that she's differentiating enough to get to all of the kids. And the other thing she said was really hard is pushing the students, and she said that's emotionally draining. She doesn't like to feel bad, and she feels like she's being mean, though she knows she's not actually being mean. She's just got to push the kids so that they start doing their best and so they can start playing catch up. And then Miss Miller said keeping calm. In the SMH room, that is something they really have to do because they are working with those severely mentally handicapped students. And she said the mental stress of the job is something that's really hard on her as well. The next thing I talked to them about was what the most rewarding part of working with special education students was. For Ms. Smith, she just said seeing progress from our quality teachers and watching the changes in data throughout the year. She said that's really fun to see the growth that they're making. Mrs. Drabinski said when she can kick a kid out of her class, that is the most rewarding thing, and she wanted me to make sure that I explained that. She doesn't want to kick them out because she doesn't like them. She's excited that she's kicking them out because they are finally where they need to be and they can finally be put into CWC. And then she said the other thing that's really exciting is when they say they like math. And the reason that's so exciting is because these kids are the low of the low and they hate math and they've always struggled with math and they just don't get it, and usually they are really upset in her class and they tell her, I hate math, I don't like it, I don't get it. And so finally hearing they like it is huge for her. And then Miss Miller, she says the small steps and strides that students make really make her feel good. And the little things they do, that's what keeps her going. Right now she's working with a severely autistic little boy, and so any kind of little growth for him is really awesome for her. Advice on supervision of special education staff was the next thing we talked about. Ms. Smith said she just really needs to make sure that everybody knows the law, which makes sense. She also says that we need to be aware of how to run an IEP meeting, because we are going to be at those meetings and we really need to know how they're run and what all goes into running one of those IEP meetings. And the last thing she said was making sure that we're building relationships with staff. She said that that's really important. Ms. Drabinski said making sure that staff meet their deadlines. They have a lot of paperwork to do, and if we as Reg Ed teachers are not meeting our deadlines, they're not meeting their deadlines, and they're going to get in trouble for that. So making sure we do that is really important. She also said making us aware of what lows really look like is important, because sometimes we'll go up to them and say, I've got this student who's really low, and what can I do to help them? And she wants us to know what a student who is extremely low looks like, because that's what she's working with. And the students we're saying are low are actually quite a bit higher than those students that are in those resource classes. As for Ms. Miller, she said to make sure that we don't give students an inch. They don't need to be babied, and they need to do what they're supposed to do, because they're pushing them every day so that they're learning and they're getting more information so that they can work more on their own. And if Reg Ed staff starts babying them or treating them differently, that's not what they want to be seeing. The next part was how to effectively work with parents, and basically all of them said communication was huge, which makes sense. Even for Reg Ed teachers, communication with parents is huge. I do have CWC, and working with those parents is really important for me as well. Ms. Smith said be understanding, let them know what their rights are, and learn how to delicately deliver information. I am a parent, so I can understand how hard it would be to hear something is wrong with my child, or something my student is learning lower than where they should be, or they're really struggling in class, and delivering that news, they have to be very delicate about that. Ms. Drabinski basically said the same thing. I really like how she phrased it. She said try to be tactfully blunt with parents, so be kind to them, but also don't lie to them. Tell them the truth and give it to them straight. Also to explain that growth of any kind is a good thing for these kiddos. And Ms. Miller, basically the same thing. Communication is huge. Also help them with problem-solving solutions. Kind of give them an idea of things that are working at home. Things that are working at school that they can try at home to work with their kiddo. The next question was, how do you work with regular ed teachers with special needs students? Provide professional development was a big one. Know which staff members are good at working with those special needs students. Ms. Smith said there are some teachers she knows she just shouldn't put special needs students with, and there are some that are really good and patient and have what they need to have to work with those kiddos. Help them understand the IEP and accommodations. That's huge. If we don't know how to use those accommodations correctly in the classroom, we're not giving the kids the education they need. She also said that she will have private conversations to make sure things are done correctly if the need be. Also suggestions on things that could be done to help those kiddos. That's something that she needs to work with Reg Ed teachers on. Mr. Vinci said make sure they're differentiating for the special needs students. Don't try to teach them the way you're teaching all your Reg Ed students, because some of them just won't get that. We do need to make sure that we're changing the things that we're presenting to them. We're working on the scaffolding. We're working on the different models, especially in math. Those are things that can really help those kiddos. Make sure they can distinguish which behaviors are behavioral disabilities and not educational disabilities. That's really big. If it's a behavior issue, they don't need to be going into that special ed classroom. If it is academic, that's what we're looking for. Last, Ms. Miller said help them understand specific needs for each kiddo. We need to know exactly what their disability is and what we need to be doing to help them in our classroom. I asked them what kind of advice they would give to a first-year administrator. Ms. Smith said, go visit another school. I had not thought of this because I have been to many IEP staffings, But she said it's really important to see how other schools run those IEP staffings. And I think that's really something, you might be able to learn all kinds of new things going into a different building and seeing how it's run. Make sure you know your SPED law, that's a huge. Know what expectations there are from the director in your district for those special education students, and find a way to gather data from the teachers. Sometimes emergencies come up and teachers can't make it to those IEP meetings. She wants to have a really good system for getting information to their case managers so that all of the teacher data is at the meeting, even if the teacher can't be there. Mrs. Drabinski said be understanding and flexible and encourage the students and push them. Really make sure that the students are getting pushed and they're not being babied and treated differently. That's something that she said a lot while we talked. Miss Miller said realize that they're not any different than any other kiddo. Remember not to treat them differently. Don't single them out. Nobody should be able to know which students are special ed students. And then another question was, what is the principal's role in special education? And it was kind of fun to see all the answers here. Miss Drabinski and Miss Miller really wanted to make sure that the principal was standoffish, that they are there to observe and help only in very, very needy situations. Other than that, they need to just be observing and quietly watching. Miss Smith said she's the facilitator to meet with the students' needs. She advocates for the students and she makes sure they're not singled out, makes sure they get a fair education. So she kind of agreed with what Mrs. Drabinski and Miss Miller said. She's there to be there for the students. She's not there to teach the students. Ms. Drabinski said that a principal is there to advocate also. They need to place the students where they are going to work best, which is it's neat to see because earlier in the interview, Ms. Smith said she is there to schedule and put the students where they will work best. Ms. Drabinski also said they're to look at the academic needs, not behaviors. And that's another schedule, that's just another piece of the scheduling. Ms. Miller said to bring in outside resources and information. They are to be an observer, not step in unless it's absolutely necessary. I'm going to have to move my box here again. What are the characteristics that they seek in aspiring administrators with regards to special education? Ms. Smith said someone who is compassionate and had a sense of empathy. Like I said, delivering that hard news, you have to make sure you're tactful. Being understanding and scheduling. Mrs. Drabinski, someone who's honest and fair. They're looking at the kids, not the disabilities. That's really something that they talked about a lot. Ms. Miller, someone who's willing to provide them a means for tools, so more of a financial backer. Here are some of my reflections from this. I really enjoyed listening to the similarities and differences. I really agreed that the principal is there as a supportive supportive presence, and they are there to get the information to everybody who needs it. They really thought it was important for the principal to be a silent observer. I kind of talked about that a lot. They really made it clear that the principal is an advocate. They are there for the students to make sure they get the education that they deserve. And again, being open and tactful with the parents. That was something that they all really kind of talked about a lot. As for my future as an administrator, I've really learned that I need to know the laws. I need to make myself available for families of those special kids, special needs students. They're going to need some help, and so that's my job to be there for them. Being empathetic. If it was my child, I would want somebody to be empathetic with me. And observe others and know that I'm not always going to know the answer. Learning from other people is going to be really huge. Some of the standards I used standard 3C, promote and model effective communication and collaboration among stakeholders using digital age tools, and program standard CKS2A. The educational leader will identify and use diverse stakeholder resources to improve school programs. Thank you for watching, and that was my video.